With that, I'll pass over to my colleague Jamie Dodon to take us through some program examples. And again, hopefully this will really bring to life a lot of the concepts that we were just talking about. So over to you, Jamie.
Great, thanks, Farah. Nice to meet you all. I'm Jamie Dodon. I'm a senior analyst at Cadmus, and as Farah mentioned, I'll be walking through some examples that help illustrate the different program design elements that Farah was just discussing. So if you see here on the following slide, we have an overview of some of the examples that, here we go. We have an overview of the examples that we're going to be walking through. You can see there are 4 examples there on the left-hand side. HeatSmart, CoolSmart, Somerville, Clean Energy Works Portland, California's low-income weatherization program, which is a little misleading because it actually expands beyond weatherization, and then a Catalyst 2020 program, which is a really awesome program that has a different angle, but it's based in Canada. Some of you may be familiar with it already. So this chart just sort of illustrates the different elements of the program, equitable program design aspects that Farah was walking through. So we'll just dive in here and I'll talk through these different programs, and then we can pause at the end and happy to answer questions about the programs. I know some of them we've worked on in detail, and some of them we've sort of completed case studies on. So happy to answer questions and talk about these programs further. So starting in on the next slide, talking about HeatSmart, CoolSmart, Somerville. So this is a program that's a community group purchasing campaign, which is, for those of you familiar, it's similar to the Solarize model that they do for solar, where you get a large number of community members within a given area to sort of sign on to install air source heat pumps in this case. And that helps, that sort of collective aggregated demand helps lower the cost of installation, and also sort of by providing contractors with sort of a large base demand that they can target. So this was a program that had a lot of outreach built into it. In terms of the program administration, it was a partnership between three different agencies within Somerville, which was really important because it enabled the city to leverage different capabilities within its administration. So the different offices were the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development, the Housing Division, and then the Department of Sustainability and Environment. So these different entities could kind of leverage different skill sets. The Housing Division particularly had a grant from HUD that they could bring to bear on the program. So that was particularly valuable for both dividing up the work and then leveraging different resources from the city agencies. And then in order to sort of supplement the administrator capacity, there also had trained volunteer coaches, which would help the program administrator sort of augment outreach and capacity to sort of play a more hands-on role with some of the community members that were engaged through the program. On the next slide, covering sort of the customer interaction piece, the program is designed to help community members and customers sort of access the resources of the program really seamlessly and as readily as possible. So there were multiple ways they do this. One was Meet the Installer events, which were in community groups, so at local churches or event centers or other places that were really accessible to community members so that they could easily show up to learn more about what an air source heat pump is, how it could provide value to their home and reduce their operational costs for heating and cooling. And also these outreach events had coordination with local community groups. So sort of groups, either whether it's a senior housing group or other nonprofits working within the area, there were partnerships that were formed with those groups to sort of access the leaders and community groups that community members were already engaging with to sort of facilitate entry into the program. And then the second piece, which Farah had mentioned earlier, is just the financial burden. So how do you minimize the financial burden, and particularly the sort of upfront cost of engaging with these types of programs? Air source heat pumps in particular have a high upfront cost. And through the HUD grant that I mentioned earlier, the program was able to offer 0% interest loan for up to $25,000 for 7 years. So this really enabled participants within the program to access the resources and sort of lower the financial burden. And this was an income qualified threshold that different program participants had to meet. So they had to go through a sort of a separate approval to get approved for this type of loan that was offered. But it really enabled low to moderate income customers to engage much more seamlessly and readily within the program. Then the final piece I wanted to highlight with this program is the consumer protection. And in this case, air source heat pumps are a relatively new market, and not all the contractors have sort of the best practices for installing them. So there was a really robust installer selection process that went into this program. Since there are only a few installers that service the program, they submitted a RFP to get interest from installers within the region, went through sort of a first round of review there, and then also did in-depth interviews with the contractors to sort of assess which would be best able to both install the technology well, but also sort of engage with customers, talk them through sort of the details of the technology and how an air source heat pump would provide value for them. And this vetting and selection process ensured that the contractors that were ultimately selected for the program delivered really high quality installations for the consumers. So regardless of sort of your socioeconomic status or whatever, you were getting really high quality installations by contractors who knew what they were doing and had been vetted. So this was, very successful program, had some interesting elements that helped sort of attract and sort of cater to some of the low-income populations and frontline communities that were within Somerville. So moving to the next slide, the next program I want to talk through is the Clean Energy Works Portland. So this is a program in Portland, Oregon. Did whole home energy upgrades, which included both weatherization and air source heat pump installations. And this one is interesting for several reasons, as we'll get into. Particularly interesting in terms of the way that they try to incorporate equity within the supply chain. But starting with customer interaction, similar to the Somerville program, they had energy advocates with technical expertise. So these advocates, which were sort of similar to the volunteer coaches in Somerville, could really talk homeowners through their sort of what technologies were right for them, what weatherization packages, whether an air source heat pump would make economic sense for their building. And this just helps people to understand, this stuff can be complicated, as we all probably know. So being able to understand what the benefits and trade-offs are of the different technologies is really valuable, and having someone to walk you through that process that you trust and that has been given to you by the program and by the city is definitely a valuable aspect that can reduce the burden of customer engagement and interaction in terms of time invested. And then similarly, again, to Somerville, there was a reduced financial burden. So the financing package that they offered wasn't as sort of robust as what Somerville was able to offer, but they did do reduced loans ranging from 4 to 6% over 20-year periods for those that needed them. And this just helps, again, defray that upfront cost and enable more participants of different socioeconomic statuses to engage with the program. On the next slide, we're getting into the supply chain tactics that they used, as well as the supply chain and consumer protection pieces are pretty linked for this program. But they set a community workforce agreement, which was an agreement that was built with stakeholders within the related to the program, and it set a target of 30% of the project hours being performed by employees from historically underrepresented groups, and 80% of the hours performed by local contractors. So this wasn't a legally binding target, but it was set out in this community workforce agreement and sort of signed on to by various stakeholders within the program. And they dedicated a resource to sort of making sure that this happened. So it's kind of an interesting piece that I don't think that they thought that there was legal concerns about making it sort of a explicit legally binding agreement, but they sort of, by getting buy-in from the different stakeholders, they were able to really set it as the threshold they were aiming for within the project, and then allocate resources to help achieve that threshold. And in order to achieve that threshold, they had a sort of three-legged stool of incentives, supports, and requirements. So on the incentive side, they sort of offered preferential sort of placement in programs to contractor groups that were meeting that target in terms of the project hours and the local contractor hours. So sort of having them more preferentially placed within the programs and offered more opportunities for them to engage with projects. They also offered supports to contractors that didn't have sort of some of the requirements that were needed for the project. So they had, if you flip to the next slide, they had a Building Performance Institute certification, which helped address consumer protection as well to ensure that contractors were well trained. but they ensured that there was money and support for contractors that didn't already have that certification to receive it through the program. And so they offered sort of technical assistance and incentives to help them gain access to the certification as they sort of moved through the program and tried to gain access to the program. And then, yeah, the other piece of that requirement is that by requiring that they have this Building Performance Institute certification, you're ensuring that you're getting high quality contractors who can give sort of quality technology installation to the people who are engaging with the program. And yeah, so the really interesting part about this Clean Energy Works program is their approach to the supply chain. So definitely happy to sort of explore that more if there are questions about that. But it's sort of a benchmark, and using this community workforce agreement to get buy-ins for that and direct resources towards achieving that is definitely a unique approach that was valuable for this program. Then moving to the third program is the California Low-Income Weatherization Program. As I already mentioned, this expands beyond weatherization. It includes energy efficiency, electrification, air source heat pumps, and solar services. And they have a single-family version of this, but we're going to be talking about the multifamily building program that they have, which is really focused on engaging building owners to implement these improvements. So in terms of the program administration, they have an organization called Association of Energy Affordability, which is the single point of contact for all the upgrades via the program. So they're responsible for contractor procurement, on-site property assessments, and coordination of incentives and financing. And this is really valuable in terms of a program administration approach, especially when you're offering different services through the program, that there's sort of a one-stop shop that can help facilitate and be the point person for all the different upgrades offered. This helps with the customer journey and interaction, that you're not sort of passing people off to different groups in order to sort of talk about energy efficiency versus air source heat pumps versus solar. So they aggregated this all into one organization. And on the next slide, in terms of the customer interaction, again, AEA was providing technical assistance throughout the process to the property owners. So they worked very closely with the property owners in helping them sort of understand what the specific packages were that were most valuable for their buildings and how they could deliver those packages and install those as well. And then the second piece is just minimizing the financial investment. The incentives through the program covered 30 to 100% of energy efficiency upgrades and 50 to 100% of solar installations. So significantly offset the upfront costs for building owners and developers, made it more cost effective for them, and made them much more likely to install the technologies in their buildings. And then finally, this program had a sort of somewhat similar approach to Clean Energy Works Portland on supply chain, though not as sort of explicit in terms of the specific goals that they were aiming for, but they had preferential treatment for contractors that were working with, that were hiring within disadvantaged communities. And so they would sort of have preferred listing in sort of program brochures. They'd be up higher on the list, making it more likely that those contractors would receive selection by people who are engaging with the program. And then they also had a requirement they sort of linked their program with a job training program that already existed for solar PV, and required that customers or people who are engaging within the program and contractors, that if they were doing solar, they would have to hire from that job training program. And this was a sort of valuable way of supporting an existing program and also ensuring that the program that they're working on had high quality contractors who were trained for completing the installations. Then the final program that we want to talk about today is this 2020 Catalyst program. And again, this is a little bit of a different angle. It's something that is done in Canada. Instead of being a program that's run by sort of a city or government targeting customers, this is actually a capacity building program. So it's focused on developing clean energy capacity within First Nations, Métis, and Inuits in Canada, and really building out that capacity for those people to then go and implement projects, programs, policies in their sort of local communities that they are sort of trained to do. So this program annually trains around 20 catalysts for with a variety of skill sets. So they do 4 in-person week-long workshops, learning a variety of different skills, project management, policy related, clean energy finance, other skills that are related to this field. And it really emphasizes a mentor-based training method. So the people who are training in these programs are Indigenous community leaders who have sort of completed projects in their communities, who know the field really well and can sort of understand in nuance the types of sort of challenges and dynamics that the Catalyst trainees might be experiencing. And then this Catalyst network just sort of accumulates and builds over years. So it's started in 2016, 20 Catalysts trained annually. So they're up to sort of 80 Catalysts and counting. And that network serves as a resource for sort of everyone who comes through the program and everyone who graduates from the program. And at the time when we had profiled this program in a year or so ago, when we completed the USDN version of the guidebook, there were 165 clean energy Indigenous projects around Canada. So we can only expect that that number has grown in the time since then, as these catalysts and others have sort of spanned out into their communities and started to build projects and programs and policies that support clean energy. So I'll pause there and have a discussion. Happy to talk further about these programs, answer questions as best I am able, and see what you all are thinking about after that run through of some of these programs that we talked about.
Thank you. And as we go into the discussion, I thought we could bring up just a couple of questions to sort of guide the discussion. Seeing that there wasn't a lot of response in the previous questions, I think we can circulate these exact polling back to you later, so we can focus on the discussion for today. And then that way, I just want to make sure that we're addressing what your immediate priorities are. So if you're not able to respond to the poll now, that's okay. But then if you can, we'd love to hear from you. So what is the preferred role of your organization in delivering these equitable retrofits? Are you more of in the facilitation outreach is your preferred role? Design, or is it funding, or is it administration? So if you can take just a couple of quick minutes, go on menti.com and use the code 324754 on top. We should see this pop up here. If not, if you just want to share your thoughts via chat or text, or you want to chime in on the call, do let us know. If you were at the Montreal workshop, we did a version of this. It talks speaking about equity work broadly. This is specific about building retrofits and thinking about integrating equity into building retrofits. Okay, I will, in the interest of time, I will probably stay for another quick minute as I see people pop these responses in. Any last takers? Just one more. I should go get trained as an auctioneer. Maybe that might help. Okay. Moving on. This is the last Menti question for you today, I promise. The question is missing. So the question was, who is your preferred administrator for the building retrofits? So if you had to choose, if you had to, excuse me, if you had to place them on their potential for impact and also the likelihood of securing their partnership in administering your building energy retrofit program, which of these entities would you prefer? I see a question from the City of Ottawa. Jump right ahead. You should be unmuted, but if not, you can just type out the question here, or I will go in here and unmute you. Yep, go ahead, City of Ottawa.
Oh, great, thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I'm just wondering if I can ask a question to the last speaker. about those programs you just presented. Is now a good time?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, I really love the different examples from Portland and Somerville. Thanks for sharing that. Just wondering in particular about the one from Somerville. The idea of bulk community purchasing, was that actually successful in achieving cost reduction? And how was that kind of motivated? Like, was the community encouraged to self-organize and apply, or was sort of the grouping and the clustering organized by the municipality? Just like a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, so in terms of the second question, in terms of how it's organized, that was sort of the purpose of the program, was to build that demand and engage community members. So all of the sort of outreach conducted through the program, the events, they had a sort of program website that had information about heat pumps and the program offerings and sort of flyers that were delivered. Everything was really with the intention of building up demand within the community. So that was sort of the focus of the effort in the community outreach side. And then the other part of the program was sort of what I was talking about the contractor selection and training. So having a robust process to be like, and we're going to bring you these, we're going to have these, really highly trained installers who are going to give you this technology or install this technology, and you can meet them at these events. So the whole program was really like centered around building up that demand, where it otherwise might not be, sort of people might not be independently organizing or doing that sort of thing. So that was definitely the primary purpose of it. In terms of the discounts, the partnership with the selected installers led to a discount of about 15% off the cost of installation. So it did reduce sort of from a baseline typical cost, it reduced it around 15%. In addition to the financing, offers would be in addition to that. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Interesting to hear that there was so much cost reduction that was able to be achieved. I guess kind of the follow-up to that is like, does the homeowner, if it's assuming we're talking about homeowners here,
yep,
they still have a significant role to play in terms of finding contractors, getting quotes, comparing quotes, right? That's not all done by the volunteers.
So I think the homeowner, in terms of the way this program works, so they would be, I think there were 2 contractors selected for the program. So I think that they had the option of either just going with one of the contractors or sort of getting quotes from either one or both of them and then selecting between those. I'm not exactly sure, and I can follow up on this if this seems valuable. I'm not exactly sure how they sort of levelized costs between the 2 contractors, if they tried to keep that relatively on par. But in terms of the homeowner side, I think the way that the program is set up, it really lowers that burden because you're giving them an option of 2 different contractors who are vetted, trained, going to give high quality installations, and who are also engaging this program and probably offering the technology at a similar price point. And so I think the setup of the program is designed so that you could really go with either contractor and it would be fine. So it's reducing the burden on the homeowner to actually seek out those contractors and really thoroughly vet them. Does that make sense?
True, yeah, okay. Okay, so then they don't really have to do a lot of getting of quotes and estimates. So the RFP that was delivered by Somerville, then it included a certain price range for where the technology would have to be provided, because otherwise you could see them just like, if it's just 2 contractors, it's almost, there's not a lot of competition, right?
Right.
To drive those costs down.
I hadn't looked at the RFP in detail. I think that it makes it explicit that if you're engaging in the program, the idea is that you're going to be offering a cost reduction. And so they would be sort of validating that as they went through the process. And if you think about it from the contractor side point of view, they have to put in time to sort of respond to that RFP and get through the selection process. But once they're through that process, they are have a pool of customers who are interested in getting heat pumps, and they can have a really easy pathway to installations. So I think there is a value to the contractor, and that's why they're willing to reduce their price by around 15%, because it's the actual time that they spend on customer acquisition goes way down through engagement with the program.
This is
For
Abhi.
sure, yeah.
I want to jump in real quick and say that we have a we're planning on a webinar with a group called Michigan Saves down in, as you might have guessed it, Michigan. And what they have done is developed a model that sort of makes it easy, the customer acquisition process and selecting the contractor process and acquiring the loan process, the 3 steps in the overall cost of administering a program. They've found ways to minimize it by aggregating across scale in the whole province. That's an interesting model that we've kicked around the idea of having them come talk to us in one of the following weeks about that. So some of the questions that have come up today, I think we might find additional answers in that webinar there. So that them and then a few other speakers would be an interesting way to dig deeper into some of these questions that we're having around aggregation and customer acquisition and stuff like that.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I'll wait for that.
Right on. Any further questions? Farah, did you have anything to add, or should we move on to our fantastic guest speaker?